This passage is about octopuses, and they belong to the mollusca family, and that family is known as cephalopoda. Cephalopoda, you see, cephalo in Greek means the brain, the head, and poda means the legs. So the prominent thing in an octopus is of course, the head and the tentacles. You see, that is why it's called, the class is cephalopoda. They are all, you see, they have all tentacles, you see, a lot of arms, you see, and their brains, you see, that can be the size of a walnut. He points that out. I'll tell you in general what the passage is about. For instance, he talks about octopuses, and he says that they can change their texture, they can change their color. Octopuses can blend, you see, their color into the color of the environment or the surroundings in which they are, right? And compared to other, what you call mollusca, you like sea snails and others, you see, they are more intelligent, and they have what you call many arms or tentacles, but they do not have an outer shell, outer protective shell. These are some general things about the octopus which is being discussed in this passage. He also talks about four more main catalysts, you see, that you have in the octopus. That is the chromatophores, the iridophores, the papillae, and leucophores. The entire passage, in fact, is devoted to this description. And he points out that chromatophores, you see, they have a function that is, it allows, you see, the octopus to change color, right? And then he goes into the details about how it goes upon, gives you the details of there's, it contains a pigment sacs, and then which have three colors, the red, yellow, and brown pigment granules are there. And whenever it wants, you see, it can change color. It's done through the, what you call, the messaging, you see, that's carried to the brain, and then it can change color. The next thing is the iridophores, and the iridophores has to do with iridescence, right? And then it has, again, you see, think of a second level, he says, of skin that has thin stacks of shell, and these can reflect light back at different wavelengths, right? So, and he gives you the examples of a hologram, and what you call, he says how light is reflected back in a rainbow, in a hologram, you see, light is reflected. So in the same way, the iridophores, you see, help the octopus reflect the light. And the third is papillae, and again, they are the sections of the skin. This allows to change its color according to the environment in which it is staying. Now, let's look at these questions. Which one of the following statements is not true about the camouflaging ability of cephalopods? We know that number one is true, that it can change its texture. Number two is also correct. It can change its color. Number three, it can blend into the color of its surroundings. That's correct. What is incorrect is, what is untrue is, cephalopods can take on the color of their predator. No, the passage doesn't say anything about it. So number three is the correct option. Now look at the next one. All of the following are the reasons for octopuses being misfits, except that they exhibit higher intelligence than other mollusks. That's correct. They have several arms. That's correct. Do not possess an outer protective shell. Are consumed by humans and other animals. You see, that is the correct option here. Let's come to the next question. Based on the passage, it can be inferred that camouflaging techniques in an octopus are most dissimilar. They are not similar. Dissimilar to those in, that is, sea snails. Now let's look at the next question. He says, based on the passage, we can infer that all of the following statements, if true, would weaken the camouflaging adeptness of cephalopods, except one statement. Let's see. The number of chromatophores in cephalopods is half the number of iridophores and leucophores. That is the answer. This is an exception. The temperature of water at the depths at which cephalopods reside renders the transmission of neural signals difficult. This would weaken the argument, you see, if that is the case. The hydrostatic pressure at the depths of which cephalopods reside renders radial muscle movements difficult. Light reflects the cold colors red, green, and yellow at the depths at which the cephalopods reside. They would weaken the camouflaging adeptness of cephalopods, except number one. Now, the next passage in toto, in short, is about, you see, what you call not being too objective in the study of engineering. I mean, if you're totally objective in the study of engineering and you are being very precise, you are being very scientific, very mathematic, then what happens is your social responsibility, social mores, social responsibility, and ethical attitude, you see, is obviously overlooked. What is required, he says here in this passage, is that whenever we are learning engineering or whenever we are teaching engineering, right, it's not always that you teach them what is low cost and what the speed to build and ability to scale. That is not all the time, it's not important. That's a very objective way. But then we also require the human side. We also require the human side, and we have to look to that also. So in this passage, he's discussing, you see, all these things in the entire passage. And for instance, the second paragraph, he says non-technical parameters such as access to a technology, cultural relevancy, or potential harms are deemed political and invalid in this way of learning. But those technical ideals are at their core social and political choices determined by a dominant culture focused on economic growth. Look at this sentence. By choosing to downplay public welfare as a critical parameter for engineering design, we risk creating a culture of disengagement from societal concern among it. I mean, if you are going to overlook public welfare in engineering, if you are going to overlook societal responsibilities, then what are we doing is um, we are going against the ethics of what you call existence. That is what he says here. You see other examples that he's giving in the next few paragraphs. He's taking about talking about the social justice, the subjective beliefs, right? Even he goes to the point where he says that certain devices were made, you see, on the basis of racism, that these devices can be used only for the white man or on the white man, and these devices can be only used on the black person, right? So that is what he's talking about here. Final paragraph, he's talking about certain engineers who are working towards more or less a combined way of looking at engineering, you see, which includes social and ethical considerations, right? So that is the entire passage. Now let's come to what you call the questions here. He says all of the following are examples of negative outcomes of focusing on technical ideals in the medical sphere, except what? The negative outcomes: exclusion of non-privileged groups in clinical trial, which leads to incorrect drug dosages. No. Continuing calibration of medical devices based on past racial biases that have remained unadjusted for changes, neglect of research and development of medical technologies for the diagnosis and treatment of diseases that typically afflict marginalized communities, and incorrect assignment of people as female at birth, which has resulted in faulty drug investments. That is the correct option. Number four. Now let's come to the next question. He says in this passage, the author is making the claim that. Now let us see what is the claim he's making. The objective of most unexceptional solutions in engineering has shifted the focus of pedagogy from humanism and social obligations to technological mediocrity. That's not a claim that he has made, though he talks about it. Engineering students today are trained to be non-subjective in their reasoning, as this most unexceptionable enables them to develop much needed universal solutions. They are trained to be objective. I don't think he talks about it, but then there is something else to it. Engineering students today are taught to focus on objective technical outcomes independent of the social dimensions of their work. That is the correct option, right? They are taught in a very objective to look for the objective technical outcomes and not to bother about the social dimensions. Technical social dualism has emerged as a technique for engineering students to incorporate social considerations into their technical problem solving processes. No, the claim is number three. Now let's look at the next question. We have here the author gives all of the following reasons for why marginalized people are systematically discriminated against in technology related interventions, except, yes, except one. And I think he's quoting from the text. That is why all of the answers you see are within inverted commas. The discrimination against marginalized people, the discrimination against people who are racially marginalized. Beyond physical failings, subjective beliefs treated as facts by those in decision making roles can encode social inequities. No, that's not the option. And we hardly question whether devices are built sustainably, which has led to a crisis of medical waste and healthcare, accounting for 10% of US greenhouse gas emission. That is the correct option. But those technical ideals and so forth, and the last one, they are not the answers. The correct option is number two. Now, let's look at the next question. We can infer that the author would approve of a more evolved engineering pedagogy. Pedagogy has to do with teaching, right? Teaching. That includes all of the following except what? Well, the author would recommend, I think, making considerations of environmental sustainability intrinsic to the development of technological solutions. That is, you consider environment, you see, as important when you talk about developing technology. Design that is based on the needs of communities using local knowledge and responding to local priorities. That's correct. He would approve of that. Moving towards technical social dualism, where social community needs are incorporated in problem definition and solutions. No, that is not approved. Now, let's look at the next passage. And this passage is all about institutions. The point that he's trying to make here is it is for us or for the society to decide or to look at institutions and how they are treated and what are institutions. So the actually institutions, you see, they are structures and they are supposed to coordinate, you see, the actions of individuals. And he talks about, he says that we begin with the emergence of the philosophy of social sciences as an arena of thought and as a set of social institutions. Now, what he's talking about here is he's talking about the two characterizations. They may overlap, they aren't congruent. And then he talks about my view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize action. They link acting individuals into social structures. There are various kinds of institutions. Hegelians and Marxists emphasize universal institutions. So I read out the point here because in the entire passage, this is the most important thing. That is, what are you treating institutions? What things are you calling institutions? Universal institutions such as the family, the rituals, the governance, the economy, and the military. They are all institutions. And most of the institutions, you see, they appeared on their own, like the family, the rituals. And of course, he goes on to explain in detail. We have family law established, right? We have churches, constitution, laws, so many other things. We have formal institutions, we have informal institutions. And he gives you the example of the stock exchange market as a formal institution and the black marketing as an informal institution. So try to understand this point. What he's doing is he's institutionalizing everything. Look at the last sentence of the first paragraph. From constitutions at the top to bylaws near the bottom, we are always adding to or tinkering with earlier institutions. The grown and the designed are intertwined. That is, whenever you're talking about these things, you're talking about entities that are institution. And then he comes to the next point. He says that it is usual in social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from, although alongside institutions. The view taken here is different. Culture and tradition are subsets of institutions. That is, he says that culture, tradition, they are subsets, they are subordinates or subsidiaries, right? And they may change under local conditions. But the point is, all of them, whether these are sub-institutions or institutions proper, they are all structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. You see, he's making the line there. And he says here that institutions themselves then have no aims or purpose other than those given to them by actors or used by actors to explain. Now, look at the kind of argument. You see, first he says institutions must have come on their own or sprung up on their own. But the point is, it's later on when they coordinate human activities, you see, human beings have a great deal, individuals have a great deal to contribute to the functioning of the institution. And then he comes to the language. He says language is the formative institution for social life and for science. And here you have both formal and informal language. Because language is one thing which connects all of us, right? They are what you call, whether you talk about syntax, semantics, lexicon, that is vocabulary, alphabet, character set, they are all institutions within the larger institutional framework of a written language. You may have smaller institutions, larger institutions. Language is the larger institution, but within that larger institution, you have smaller institutions like grammar, syntax, vocabulary, and so forth. Then he gives you the example of natural languages and, of course, reformed natural languages and artificial languages. He says, above all, languages are paradigms of institutional tools that functions to coordinate, and that is one of the important function. You see, the function to coordinate. Right. So this is a passage you see about this institutions and the thinking that goes with that. Now let's come to the questions here. Which of the following statements best represents the essence of the passage? Yes. Language is the fundamental formal institution for social life and science. But the passage is not entirely about language. It's about institutions. Okay. Institutions are structures that serve to coordinate the actions of the individuals. That is the essence of the passage. That is the answer. Number 2 is the correct option. The stock exchange and black market are both market institutions. And he told you that one is formal and the other is informal. The stock exchange is formal and the black market is informal. It is usual in social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from institution. That's all correct. But then the basic point is, the essential point is number 2. Now let's look at the next question. Consider the fact that the stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions. One formal means that is the stock exchange is formal and one not. That is the black market isn't. Which one of the following statements best explains this quote in the context of the passage? The stock exchange and the black market are both dependent on the market to survive. I don't think that is the answer. The stock exchange and the black market are both organized to function by rules. I don't think. Market instruments can be formally traded in the stock exchange and informally traded in the black market. He's not talking about all these things in that quote. The stock exchange and the black market are examples of how women within the same domain, different kinds of institutions can coexist. So that is the answer, number 4. Because when he talks about the stock exchange market and the black market, they are both what you call institutions within a larger institution. And they can coexist. That is what he means here. One is formal and the other is informal. One is, why does he say formal? What does he mean by formal? Formal means that there is a kind of a legal sanction. It is bound by the law, right? The stock market. But the black market isn't, and that is why it is informal. So the correct option is number 4. Now let's look at the next question. All of the following inferences from the passage are false except natural language refers to that stage of language development where no conscious human intent is evident in the formation of language. That is the correct option. Number 1 is correct. The others, as concepts, culture, and tradition, have no analytical, explanatory, or expository power, especially when they are treated in isolation. No, they are false. The institution of friendship cannot be found in the institution of joint stock companies because the first is an informal, while the second is formal. Institutions like the family are natural and cannot be consciously modified. No, the number 1 is the correct option. The next question. In the first paragraph of the passage, what are the 2 characterizations that are keen as overlapping but not congruent? I think he tells us about it. That is the academic disciplines and institutions. He tells that in the first 3 lines of the topmost paragraph. So the answer is academic disciplines and institutions, number 1. Now we come to the next passage. And this is about music and how human beings, you see, love music, make music, and are devoted to music. And of course, the key words in the passage, you see, are humans, musicking, linguistic capacities, symbol making, modern humanity. They are all key words in the passage. He says that 20,000 years ago, the musical system or the musical abilities, you see, were quite similar to what they are today. He says that musical capacities with human beings and their qualifications, he talks about that. If you look at the passage, he says human today make music, right? And that only certain humans make music. And then he talks about that you have music specialists. There are people who listen to music. There are people who make music, right? And he ends up with this paragraph by saying humans are musicking creatures. You can get a rough idea, you see, because in the entire paragraph he says in today's societies most listen to music rather than making it. We are almost all of us musicians. I mean, if we just happen to share the rhythm of a song, the tune of a song, if you are able to appreciate or sway to the repeated tune of a song, then you can be rest assured that you yourself, you see, are a musician. That is why you react that way. That is the argument that he is giving. And he says here in the second paragraph, the set of capacities that enables musicking is a principal marker of modern humanity. And he says here that there is what he call nothing polemical in this assertion except a certain insistence, which will give figure often in what follows, that music king be included in our thinking about fundamental human commonality. And he says there are different kinds of capacities that are involved in musicking, right? And they take shape. They may be overlapping capacities, but the point is it is music, right? And human beings, you see, they are speaking creatures as well as musicking creatures. That is what he points out here. If you look at the passage carefully, he talks about the linguistic capacities. And why does he talk about it? Let's see. He says humans are symbol makers too. But when it comes to music, the symbolism may not work. It may not be of much use there. See what he says here. But in fundamental features, musicking is neither language like nor symbol like, and from these differences come many clues to its ancient emergence. Why does he say that? Because if you talk about language, if you talk about symbols, then you talk about when did they emerge. And if you're talking about when did they originate, then his argument is that music possibly, you see, predated both symbolism and language. It was an earlier invention. It has an earlier origin, and that is what he takes up in the last paragraph, where he talks about that 50,000 years or so, or 20,000 years or so, that you had the musical capacities working, and the music, you see, originated long back. But it developed slowly across a long period of time. That is what he points out. Now let's come to the questions here. Which one of the following statements, if true, would weaken the author's claim that humans are musicking creatures? Let's see. As musicking is neither language like nor symbol like, it is much older form of expression. It doesn't weaken the argument. Non-musical capacities are of far greater consequence to human survival than the capacity for music. Musical capacities are primarily socio-cultural, which explains the wide diversity of musical forms. This is the correct answer, number 3. From a cognitive and psychological vantage, musicking arises from unconscious dispositions, not conscious ones. So this has nothing to do with what he has asked. Right. Let's look at the next one. Which one of the following set of terms best serves as keywords to the passage? I think I told you that. The answer is number 2. Humans, musicking, linguistic capacities, symbol making, and modern humanity. That they are the key. The next question, based on the passage, which one of the following statements is a valid argument about the emergence of music? So valid argument, you can go to the last paragraph for this question and you get the answer there. 20,000 years ago, human musical capacities were not very different from what they are, right? That is what he says here. That's a valid argument about the emergence of music. So the others are not, cannot be the answer. Number one is the correct option here, because if you look at the others, anyone who can perceive and experience music must be considered capable of music. No, that's not the point here. No overlap between linguistic capacity, no. Although musicking is not a language like, it shares the quality of being a form of expression. That's besides the point. Why is it beside the point? Because he's talking about the emergence of music, right? The origin of music. That is the reason. The next question is, think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bald statement. I think this is in the first line of the first paragraph, right? Bald statement. In the context of the passage, what is the author trying to communicate in this quoted extract? What is he trying to tell us? You see, read the passage. Humans today make music. Think beyond all the qualifications that might trail after this bald statement that only certain humans make music, that extensive training is involved, that many societies distinguish music specialists from non-musicians, that in today's societies most listen to music rather than making it, and so forth. He has put dots, 3 dots there, because this is the entire quote that he wants there, right? So what is he trying to communicate? Although there may be many caveats and other considerations, the statement is essentially true. So that is the answer. Number one is the answer. Thinking beyond qualifications allows us to give free rein. No, a bald statement is one. Now, we don't have to define the bald statement. It's not that he is asking for a definition of the bald statement. So 3 and 4 are ruled out. The correct option is number one. Now, let's look at the next exercise. Here you have to accommodate a sentence. So let us look at this sentence here. He says most were first time users of a tablet and digital app. If look at the sentence, most, that is, he is referring to some people who for the first time were making using of the tablet or the digital app. Aage bade USP lies in the ethnographic research that constituted the foundation of its development process. Customizations based on learning directly from potential users were critical to making this self-paced app suitable to both a literate and non-literate audience. Okay, now you can't have most for first-time users, because you aren't referring to anyone. I mean, when you say most were first-time users, then the preceding sentence must have reference to some people, right? The user interface caters to a Hindi-speaking audience who have minimal to no experience with digital services and devices. Okay, the content and functionality of the app are suitable for a wide audience. This includes youth preparing for an independent role in life, or a student ready to create a strong foundation of financial management early in her life. Okay, household members desirous of improving their family's financial strength to reach their aspirations can also benefit. We piloted Aage Bade in 2020, early 2021, over with 400 women from rural areas. Now here you can have this sentence, most were first time users of a tab. That as a reference to the 400 women, you see, most of the women were first time users of a tablet and a digital app. So you can have option 4 is the correct slot where you can put this sentence. Now let's look at he says that choose the option that best captures the essence of the passage. He's given you 4 summaries of a passage at the top. If you look at the passage, several of the world's earliest cities were organized along egalitarian lines. Now, that is one point. In some regions, urban population governed themselves for centuries without any indication of the temples and palaces that would later emerge. Okay, in other, temples and palaces never emerged at all. Okay, and there is simply no evidence of a class of administrators or any other sort of ruling stratum. It would seem that the mere fact of urban life does not necessarily imply any particular form of political organization, and never did. Far from resigning us to inequality, the picture that is now emerging of humanity's past may open our eyes to the egalitarian possibilities we otherwise would have never considered. Yes. Now, what I want to say here is there was a time, possibly, we had no system of, you see, one ruling over the other. The political, the civic organizations, other things were rather, you see, in a way closely coordinated with the public there. So now let us look at the summaries here. The emergence of a class of administrators in ruling stratum transformed the egalitarian ancient to the hierarchical. No, he's not talking about hierarchy. So number one is incorrect. The lack of hierarchical administration in ancient cities can be deduced by the absence of religious and regal structures such as temples and palaces. Now, what has hierarchical administration to do with temples and what you call churches or palaces, you see? So that's not correct. Contrary to our assumption that urban settlements have always involved hierarchical political and administrative structures, ancient cities were not organized in this way. That is again somehow deviating from the main point. The main point is in number 4, and he says here, we have now the evidence in support of the existence of an egalitarian urban life in some ancient cities where political and civic organization was far less hierarchical. You see, he has taken up all the points there. So, number 4 is the correct option. Let's look at the next passage. So today, many of the debates about behavioral control in the age of big data echo Cold War era anxieties about brainwashing, insidious manipulation, and repression in the technological society. In his book Psychopolitics, Hahn warns of the sophisticated use of targeted online content, enabling influence to take place on a pre-reflexive level. On our current trajectory, freedom will prove to have been merely an interlude. The fear is that the digital age has not liberated us but exposed us by offering up our private lives to a machine learning algorithms that can process masses of personal and behavioral data. In a world of influencers and digital entrepreneurs, it's not easy to imagine the resurgence of a culture engendered through disconnect and disaffiliation, but concerns over the threat of online targeting, polarization, and big data have inspired recent polemics about the need to rediscover solitude and disconnect. What is it talking about? You see, in the entire passage, he's talking about your data, your personal information, you see, available, and the freedom of the people, you see, and the need for what you call isolation, the need for privacy, you see. That's what he's talking about. Rather than freeing us, digital technologies and enslaving us by collecting personal information and influencing our online behavior. No, I don't think that's a very good summary because it's actually not talking about the freedom, you see, which is there in the passage. The notion of freedom and privacy is at stake in a world where artificial intelligence is capable of influencing behavior through data gathered online. No. With big data making personal information freely available, the debate on the nature of freedom and the need for privacy has resurfaced. That is the best option here, number 3. Number 4 doesn't carry out the whole message, so number 3 is the correct answer. Now let's come to the next exercise, and here you have got to do a proper sequencing. And if you look at the entire what you call cluster of sentences, you may see for yourself what could be the first sentence. You say women may prioritize cooking because they feel they alone are responsible for mediating a toxic and unhealthy food system. Food is commonly framed through the lens of individual choice. You can choose to eat healthily. This is particularly so in a neoliberal context. The individualized framing of choice appeals. Okay. Now, to my mind, and to of course if to your judgment also, it should click that number 2 can be the first sentence because it is a general sentence. Food is commonly framed through the lens of individual choice. So 2 is the first sentence and 4 will follow 2 because there he talks about the individualized framing of choice which has referenced in number 2. And then you can take up number 3. This is particularly so in a neoliberal context, where the state has transferred the responsibility for food to onto individual consumers. And the last is, of course, number 1. So it should be 2, 4, 3, 1. Now let's look at the next exercise. This was years in the making, but fast tracked during pandemic when people started being more mindful about their food, he explained. Maybe somebody is talking and that has been quoted here because it is within quotes, and he says he explained. Now let us look here. For millennia, ghee has been a venerated staple of the subcontinental diet, but it fell out of favor a few decades ago when saturated fats were largely considered to be unhealthy. So you can't have it here. This was years in the making. No, but more recently, as the thinking around saturated fats is shifting globally, Indians are finding their own way back to this ingredient that is so integral to their cuisine. For Karmakar, a renewed interest in ghee is emblematic of return to basics movement in India. Okay. Now, if you put after 3, if you have this sentence, this movement is also a part of such and such thing, then the problem, you see, of accommodating this sentence with he explained is becomes very difficult, because you have what you call for Karmakar. Karmakar, the reference to Karmakar. Now, he explained refers to Karmakar. So therefore, the sentence should come into slot 3 because they have to be close. Otherwise, you can't put it somewhere else and say, well, he explained refers to Karmakar. You can't do that. So the option 3 is the correct slot, you see, where you can put this sentence in. Let's look at the next exercise. So from chemical pollutants in the environment to the damming of rivers to invasive species transported through global trade and travel, every environmental issue is different, and there is no single tech solution that can solve this crisis. Okay. They look at 3, it says this would allow, and so forth. You see, if you read number 2, discourse on the threat of environmental collapse revolves around cutting down emissions, but biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are caused by myriad and diverse reasons. 2 is a general statement, so I think you can have 2 as the first sentence. Discourse on the threat of environmental collapse, right, revolves around cutting down emissions and so forth. So number 2 can be the first sentence in this order. And then he talks about what you call myriad and diverse reasons. You have number 1, which when he talks about the chemical pollutants in the environment to invasive species transported, number 1. And then he talks about the environmental crisis, which he has mentioned that can solve this crisis. Clearly, our environmental crisis. In 1, he talks about the crisis. So number 4 talks about the crisis. So you have 4, you see, following number 1, and after that you have 3. This would require legislation. 2, 1, 4. The next one, it is the same kind of exercise where you have to reorder this sequence, proper sequence, you see. The trajectory of cheerfulness, though the self is linked to the history of the word cheer, which comes from an old French meaning phase. Okay. Translations of the Bible into vernacular languages expanded the noun cheer into more abstract cheerfulness, something that circulates as an emotional and social quality defining the self in a moral community. When you take on a cheerful expression, no matter what the state of your soul, your cheerfulness moves on to the self. The interior of the self is changed by the power of cheer. People in the medieval Canterbury Tales have a piteous or a sober cheer. Cheer is an expression and a body part lying at the intersections of emotion and physiology. Now, if you look at the order of these sentences, the first thing is, I think number 3 should be the first sentence, obviously, because he talks about in general that when you take on a cheerful expression, and then he goes on to explain what you call the etymology, or what you say, the origin of cheer. So number after 3 you have number 1. The trajectory of cheerfulness is linked and so forth. And after number one, since he has talked about what you call the history of the word cheer, and then it comes from Old French meaning phase, then chronologically, then it should be number four, chronology of history, because then he's talking about the medieval Canterbury Tales written by Geoffrey Chaucer. You see how the word cheer was used there. So it is 314, and the final sentence is number two. Now let's come to the last passage, and you have to choose the option that best captures the essence of the passage. There's a common idea that museum artworks are somehow timeless objects available to admire for generations to come. But many are objects of decay. Even the most venerable old master painting don't escape. Pigments discolor, varnishes crack, canvases warp. This challenging fact of art world life is down to something that sounds more like a threat from a morality tale, inherent vice. Right? The point is, these art objects, they also decay. Damien Hirst's iconic shark floating in a tank, entitled The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, is a work that put a spotlight on inherent vice. When he made it in 1991, Hirst got himself in a pickle by not using the right kind of pickle to preserve the giant fish. The result was that the shark began to decompose quite quickly, its preserving liquid clouding, the skin wrinkling, and an unpleasant smell wafting from the tank. Okay, now what he's trying to tell is, any work of art, you see, it's not permanent. They decay with time. And the challenge that you have got to face, the problem you have is to protect them from decay, to getting what you call frayed, so, or getting warped, getting discolored. Now let's see at the options here. Museums have to guard timeless art treasures from interesting defects such as the deterioration of paint, polish, and canvas. He's only emphasizing museums. He's not talking about the artworks, the first. Because try to understand, this central point in the passage is about protecting the artworks. Now here he has prioritized the museum, you see. Museums are left with the moral responsibility of restoring and preserving the artwork, since artists cannot preserve their works beyond life. Why shift everything to the museum? You see, that is my point. It's a general thing. So why put everything to the museum? The role of museums has evolved to ensure that the artworks are preserved forever in addition to guarding and displaying them. Why so much emphasis on museum? That's not required. Artworks may not last forever. That is the point. They may deteriorate with time, correct? And the challenge is to slow down their degeneration. So number four is the best option here.